Tea in a Bar by Atia Blackcharm. Summary. When they warped the green-haired hero student to the bar, they were ready for a fight, or to at least have to knock him out. They remembered how he had fought during the sports festival, and it wasn't a secret that he had managed to take down Stain, who approved of him. They were ready for him to come at them quickly with green lightning surrounding him and pressure in the air. They were not ready for the tired blank face as he looked at them simply and said, "Oh," while carrying a grocery bag. "Hey, Shigaraki, Kurogiri," Midoriya said bluntly with tired eyes. "How you guys been?" TLDR, the LOV kidnapped Izuku while he was in the middle of getting dinner, and much to their surprise, Izuku is just tired and would rather simply enjoy some of Kurogiri's tea. Chapter 1, Nope. Izuku was tired. He had always been tired in a way since he was little. There was always that weight on his mind that made it hard to breathe, hard to move, but he always pushed through it, trying to lift his head and look at others with a smile, even though all he got were glares and snarls of disgust in return. He would try to smile even though his skin pulled uncomfortably at burns and new cuts he got from school. He'd smiled at his mom when she asked him how his day was, even though he knew he would have to go to the bathroom and change a bandage or two. Even though that day at school he'd found another red spider lily waiting for him at his desk. He smiled at All Might, even though he could throw up from the phantom sensation of sludge going down his throat. And he smiled as All Might had left him on the roof and as he leaned a bit too far off the railing before noticing the explosions from afar. He smiled after being scolded for saving Bakugo, and he smiled when All Might told him he could become a hero. But even then, he was just so tired. When he got into UA, he felt like the weight had been lifted somewhat, and it wasn't hard to smile anymore, but slowly and surely its presence became more obvious, and Izuku found himself waking up to that same feeling as before. But he still smiled, and no one could tell the difference. Even when he was treated for his injuries with Stain, he smiled at Ida and Todoroki in the hospital, but all he really wanted to do was yell at the police and maybe yell at Ida some more and tell Gran Torino to stop fucking hitting him with a cane. But he didn't. Instead, he was polite to the police, apologized, and closed his eyes to sleep that never really came. His mom, of course, was working as usual. Ever since he went to UA, she started taking on more shifts and spending time outside the house. Izuku really didn't notice, though. For a long time, his relationship with his mom had become more distant. He still loved her, but over the years, it came to the feeling that someone has towards a distant family member that only visited every few years. He wouldn't be surprised to learn that she felt the same way. She still fed him and gave him enough money for an allowance and to get food when she wasn't home, though. But he knew that he wouldn't really understand or experience how Kirishima would talk about what he and his mom did over the weekend. So it was no surprise that yet again he had to go buy some canned soup or maybe a microwave dinner when he got a text from his mom saying that she would be on a business trip for the next 2 weeks and there was no groceries at home. He wasn't going to buy groceries so late at night, but he was still hungry, so he made his way to the convenience store. The cashier didn't even give him a second glance, already used to seeing him come at odd hours. Izuku went down the aisles, got 2 cans of soup, a notebook, and a new pen. At one point, he thought he saw someone he recognized watching him, but when he looked, there was no one there. So he paid and walked out of the store. It had only been a few seconds that he was walking down the dimly lit sidewalk when everything went black and he felt the familiar sensation of the wart from USJ. When he could see the light again, he saw that he was inside a lit bar and that he was in front of Shigaraki. He gave a quick glance around the room and saw Kurogiri along with some other people, probably villains or not, who knows. Izuku really didn't have the energy to say anything else but, oh. When they had warped the green-haired hero student to the bar, they were ready for a fight, or to at least to have to knock him out. They remembered how he had fought during the sports festival, and it wasn't a secret that he had managed to take down Stain, who approved of him. They were ready for him to come at them with green lightning surrounding him and pressure in the air. They were not ready for the tired blank face as he looked at them and simply said, "Oh," while carrying a grocery bag. There was no green lightning, there was no shock, there was no anger. There was just a teenage boy in a hoodie with dark circles, 2 rival eraser heads, and a plastic bag. There was no panicking or asking questions. Instead, he greeted Kurogiri, Shigaraki, like they were simply acquaintances and not people he had actively fought against in the past. "Hey, Shigaraki," Kurogiri, Midoriya said bluntly with tired eyes. "How you guys been?" No one said anything. They were still tense, waiting for him to do something. When no one responded, Shigaraki watched as Midoriya looked around the bar, the other people that were in there. Green Eyes looked back at Red. "Who are the newbies?" he asked. Shigaraki didn't get to say anything before twice Toga and Compress began to introduce themselves in an energetic way. Spinner followed suit, so did Magne, a bit calmer. Meanwhile, Dabi didn't say anything until Midoriya just kept staring at him, and he finally let out a quick Dabi. Midoriya took one of his hands out of his hoodie pocket and gave them a quick wave. "Cool, nice to meet you guys. Now, is there a kitchen?" He lifted up the plastic bag he had. "I was just picking up my dinner and I'm still hungry, so..." There was still a bored-looking expression on Midoriya's face as he waited for an answer. In the end, Kurogiri told him about the kitchen and led him to it, keeping a close eye on him for obvious reasons. Everyone watched him go. Midoriya didn't seem to mind. While they heard the sound of something being done in the kitchen, Dabi turned to Shigaraki. "Hey, dust fuck, what the hell is up with the kid?" Shigaraki scowled in annoyance and reached out a hand to Dabi, who easily dodged it. "How the fuck should I know?" He looked back at Midoriya, who was in the process of heating up some canned soup while Kurogiri kept an eye on the hero brat. Shigaraki was confused. This was not the same kid he fought at the USJ. This kid didn't have that spark in his eye. Instead, the boy's eyes were dull when he arrived at the bar, and he didn't seem to have any reaction to suddenly being face to face with a villain who in the past almost killed him. After a couple of minutes, he watched as Midoriya came out of the kitchen with a bowl of hot soup and took a seat at the bar with no hesitation. If someone were to come in unaware of who anyone was, they wouldn't have known that Midoriya had just been essentially abducted. Instead, Midoriya was just looked like a tired kid who was eating soup for some reason in a bar. And God, did that kid look tired. Shigaraki wondered why. A second later, Shigaraki saw the glint from a knife that Toga threw at Midoriya. The kid managed to catch it and looked at Toga. "Nice try, but please don't do that while I'm eating." Shigaraki waited for another knife to be thrown or some manic smile to take up Toga's face. Instead, she simply smiled. All right." Surprisingly, Midoriya sent her a soft smile before going back to eating. Everyone was oddly quiet as they watched the hero student eat, each of them waiting for something to happen. "Did we just kidnap a kid to have him just eat soup?" Magne asked Compress. "I do not know, but it's quite a scene to see, is it not? Do you see how the boy greeted Shigaraki and Kurogiri?" "Quite interesting indeed," Compress responded. Magne looked over at Shigaraki, who was looking at Midoriya with an odd look on his face, and the others who were watching Midoriya with a close eye. It seemed that no one really knew what to do with the situation at hand, other than Midoriya, who seemed to be enjoying his soup, despite the company he had. Eventually, there was no more soup. A few minutes after finishing, Midoriya looked up at Kurogiri, who was down the bar rearranging some glasses. "Kurogiri," Midoriya called. The misty man looked towards the boy. "Yes, Midoriya, if you don't mind, can I have some tea?" he asked. The mist that made up the villain's body seemed to freeze for a second before returning to its regular movement. "You want tea?" he asked, as if he was unsure of what he heard. Midoriya nodded. "Yeah, I don't really mind what kind of tea you have," he paused. "It's fine if you don't. I'll take water too." Kurogiri reassured Midoriya quickly. "No, I believe there is some tea." And the other villains in the bar watched with confusion as Kurogiri prepared Midoriya a cup of tea with what could only be described as excitement. When Kurogiri handed Midoriya a cup of tea, he told him it was chamomile. Midoriya chuckled a bit. "That obvious that I need some sleep?" "Indeed so, young man," Kurogiri replied. Midoriya only hummed and smiled in response while taking a sip of the tea. The others watched the odd interaction until twice asked about what they had just said. "Chamomile tea helps you sleep, dumbass," Dabi said. "And the little hero here has dark circles that like a damn raccoon." "I like them. They look cute on him," Toga said. "You think blood looks good on people." So, Shigaraki, why am I here? Midoriya asked calmly after taking a sip of tea. The casual question surprised everyone for a moment before they looked at the leader of the LOV. They could see Shigaraki think for a moment and look at the TV in the back of the bar. He turned back to Midoriya. Tell us about UA, about All Might and his weaknesses. Midoriya sighed. Sorry, I can't help you there. The teachers and administration don't exactly tell us about weaknesses of the school, and I avoid dealing with them as much as possible. What? And All Might, Midoriya continued as if he didn't cut off a villain who could decay him with just 5 fingers. I guess he's partial to American slang. I've heard him curse a lot in English. I don't think he likes spicy food, and he's kind of not the best teacher. Midoriya took another sip of tea and shrugged. So yeah, those are a few cons to the guy. The next thing that was heard was laughter, and Midoriya turned to see Dabi cackling while Shigaraki tried to decay him unsuccessfully. Off to the other side, he could see Twice switching between shaking with laughter and being still. Toka was just looking at the scene with an amused face along with Magne, and Converse had put a hand to his mouth like he was trying to hide a smile, despite the mask being in place. When it was obvious that the flame user wasn't going to be reduced to dust, Shigaraki turned back to Midoriya. You know more. You're his successor. Sensei told me so. Ha! Successor, Midoriya scoffed. The green-haired boy thought about how All Might told him he wanted him to be the next symbol of peace, to announce himself at the sports festival, how he told him he would do his internship with Gran Torino. It made him feel bitter with how the man hadn't even asked what goals Izuku had as a hero or asked where he would have wanted to do his internship. If your sensei thinks I'm going to be the next symbol of peace, then he's wrong. Midoriya looked down at the teacup. I have no plans to do that, he said quietly. Everyone watched as Midoriya seemed to slump down at his own words, and Shigaraki began to question if Sensei had been wrong. He looked back at the TV and saw that there was a light on, meaning that Sensei had been listening, but there was no voice that came out. Before anyone else could say anything, Spinner asked a question. What do you mean All Might isn't a good teacher? Stan himself called him a true hero, so wouldn't he be good at teaching future heroes? At this, Midoriya set the cup of tea down with a soft yet solid thud. Everyone heard, and he turned around in his seat. One, Midoriya held up a finger. I have a lot to say about Saint's philosophy, but he was right to a degree about heroes' motivations. But the killing I do not agree with. So, with him thinking that All Might is the definition of true hero, I can point out some flaws with that thinking. He held up another finger. And 2, just because you are good at defeating villains and saving people does not mean you are skilled in other areas. In All Might's case, the man is a lousy teacher. He's never received any formal training in education and doesn't even have a license. I'm actually surprised that he's teaching at UA. Also, if he was a mentor, I don't think he'd be good at adapting how he was taught and his way of doing things according to his mentee. Midoriya said, knowing full well that All Might had not been doing his best job when it came to teaching him, if his many broken bones had anything to say about it. Midoriya looked at the villains who were still staring at him. He looked at Spinner. So, Spinner, does that answer your question? Spinner nodded, albeit a bit unsure, it seemed. Hey, kid, Magne suddenly said, drawing Midoriya's attention to her. Shouldn't you not talk trash about him, especially to a bunch of villains? Why not? Midoriya replied. If anyone is actually going to believe me and listen, it would be you guys, wouldn't it? I'm pretty sure they would have already gotten a punch to the face or some quirk used on me for talking shit if I was talking to someone at UA or Heroes. You're expecting that from Heroes and from students at UA? Compress asked in disbelief. Yep, I've gotten hit and I've had quirks used on me for doing things less serious than talking bad about Japan's -- hero, Midoriya said nonchalantly before turning to take another sip of tea. He really liked how Kurogiri made it. When he turned back around, he saw once again odd looks on the villains' faces. Are you okay, kid? Twice asked before a different voice said that he didn't care. Midoriya let out a huff of air in amusement and smiled. Nope, he said before taking another sip of tea. Well, that was chapter 1 of Tea in a Bar by Atia Blackcharm. Thank you for listening. Let me know what you thought in the comments down below.